The movie's safest weapon was not the director, it was the music. Bohemian Rhapsody was not sold to the public as an ordinary film. It was sold as a return ticket. The first promise was not plot, structure, or critical approval. The first promise was memory, a stomp, a clap, a voice rising over a crowd, the feeling of thousands of arms lifting at Wembley as if the audience had been invited back into a moment they already knew by heart. That was the power of Queen. The songs arrived before the story had to explain itself. We Will Rock You did not need context. We Are the Champions did not need permission. Somebody to Love carried loneliness before the film named it. Bohemian Rhapsody already sounded like confession, theater, rebellion, and release. The movie could lean on that music because the music had already done decades of emotional work. For many viewers, the theater did not feel like a place to judge a troubled production. It felt like a place to remember. Parents brought children. Older fans brought memories they had carried for decades. Younger viewers came for a legend they had inherited through radio, sports arenas, family playlists, and karaoke nights. Nostalgia became the first protective wall around the film. When a crowd knows every lyric, the movie does not have to earn trust from nothing. Then the music needed a face, and that face had to carry risk. Freddie Mercury was not just a famous singer attached to a catalog of hits. He was a public memory people still carried: talent, loneliness, illness, stage power, and loss. That is why Freddie gave the film moral weight. Audiences did not arrive only to watch a band rise. They arrived to mourn, celebrate, and feel that a voice had been returned to them. The film could be debated, but Freddie was harder to dismiss. His memory gave the project a seriousness it could not manufacture on its own. Rami Malek's transformation became the body of that seriousness. The walk had to be studied. The jaw had to change. The posture had to shift from shy distance to stage command. Even the false teeth became part of the labor, a visible sign that the performance was built through discomfort, discipline, and physical detail. Malek was not simply wearing a costume. He was asking the audience to believe that the space between actor and icon could briefly close. That belief was valuable. Once viewers accepted Malek as Freddie, the film gained another layer of protection. The audience could focus on craft, resemblance, movement, sweat, and voice. They could watch the Live Aid recreation and feel memory lock into place. For a few minutes, many viewers did not want distance. They wanted the feeling back. That feeling was not foolish. It came from affection. Queen had lived in people's lives long before the film asked for their attention. Freddie had become more than a performer. He had become a symbol of excess, vulnerability, defiance, and loss. When a film carries a figure like that, the public often enters with an unspoken agreement: give us the feeling back, and we will forgive rough edges. That agreement is where reputation becomes powerful. A normal biopic must persuade the viewer to care. Bohemian Rhapsody began with care already waiting in the room. The songs lowered defenses. The recreated concerts created recognition. Malek's commitment gave the campaign a human center. The film did not have to build emotion from scratch. It only had to press emotion already stored. The campaign understood this. It did not need to explain every choice if it could keep the audience close to the songs and the camera close to Malek's face. It did not need to make the film flawless if it could make the experience feel generous. Viewers came to see Freddie again, or at least a version of Freddie close enough to touch. For many people, that longing became stronger than doubt. Nostalgia can protect a film better than any statement. It does not argue. It returns the viewer to a feeling. It lets people believe they are not being sold a product, but being given back a piece of themselves. In that state, questions soften. Criticism waits outside the song. The theater becomes less like a courtroom and more like a shared memory. But a shield this effective has to be guarded. The music could open the door. Freddie could give the story weight. Malek could hold the spotlight. Behind that polished emotional surface, real power still had to decide what stayed visible, what stayed quiet, and who would be placed at the center when the pressure began to build. That was not nostalgia anymore. That was control. Rami Malek gave the film a face the campaign could sell. That sounds simple, but for Malek, the role was not simple at all. It was a career gamble placed under a very bright light. He was not stepping into a small dramatic part that could disappear quietly if the film failed. He was stepping into Freddie Mercury, a voice millions already loved, a stage presence fans had studied for decades, and a queer icon whose image carried memory, pain, pride, and risk. Malek's pressure came from more than impersonation. He had to convince the audience that they were not watching an actor trying on famous clothes. He had to make the walk, the teeth, the posture, the nervous smile, the stage command, and the private loneliness feel close enough to be accepted. If he pushed too hard, the performance could look like imitation. If he held back, it could feel too small for Freddie. There was no safe middle ground. That is why the role mattered so much. Malek had come from a career where nothing was guaranteed. Every actor knows the early life of small rooms, weak coffee, auditions that go nowhere, and doors that do not open. A role like this can change everything. If the film worked, he would not only be praised, he would be recast in the public mind as a serious actor capable of carrying a cultural monument. But if the film collapsed under pressure, he could be pulled down with it. The public does not always separate the performer from the damaged product. A failed biopic can make an actor look exposed. A messy campaign can stain even a strong performance. Malek's face was the film's selling point, but that also meant his face would be the first one audiences judged if the project began to fall apart. Across from that risk stood Bryan Singer, a director who brought power of a different kind. He was not an unknown name hired to quietly manage a studio job. He arrived with the weight of major franchise experience, especially through X-Men, and that gave him authority inside a large production. A studio likes a director who can handle scale. A band's legacy needs a director who can make the myth look expensive. A campaign likes a recognizable name if the final product can be kept clean. But Singer also brought reputation risk. His name had already been surrounded by serious allegations and public controversy before the film became an awards season product. Those allegations must be handled carefully. Singer denied accusations against him and disputed reporting about his conduct. The public record around him was not a clean courtroom verdict the audience could package neatly. It was a cloud of claims, denials, legal language, press coverage, and long-running suspicion. That made his position dangerous for everyone around the film. The person with creative authority could also become the person whose name threatened the product. When the highest seat on a project carries that kind of risk, everyone else has to calculate quietly. The actor has to protect the performance. The studio has to protect the release. The band has to protect the legacy. The campaign has to protect the emotional story it wants the public to believe. That tension is the real power map. It was not one actor against one director in a clean room. It was a valuable film surrounded by interests that could not afford collapse. Malek needed the role to land. Singer's name remained attached to the project, while controversy threatened to take over the frame. 20th Century Fox needed a commercial product to survive its own pressure. Queen needed its music, history, and public memory handled without turning the film into a liability. The numbers made that pressure colder. A film like Bohemian Rhapsody was not a small gamble. It carried studio money, marketing plans, release timing, international value, music rights, brand partnerships, and audience expectation. When that many interests sit on one table, nobody is only thinking about art. They are thinking about exposure. They are thinking about loss. They are thinking about how quickly one problem can move from set rumor to headline to public judgment. Queen's position added another layer. The surviving members were not simply lending songs to a movie. They were allowing a version of their story and Freddie's story to enter mass public memory. That gave the project emotional force, but it also raised the stakes. If the film failed badly, it would not only be a weak biopic, it could damage the way a new generation met Queen. So the board was crowded before the first public crack became visible. Malek carried the human face. Singer carried authority and risk. Fox carried the financial weight. Queen carried the memory the film needed to feel sacred. No one could afford a clean failure. No one could afford the wrong story becoming louder than the music. Pressure from every side created a sealed room. And inside that room, the first cracks did not begin in magazine profiles or award speeches. They began with absence, tension, and the empty spaces where control was supposed to be. The first crack was not a bad review. It was not a fan argument. It was not an award season headline. It was something colder on a working film set. Absence, where authority was supposed to be. A production like Bohemian Rhapsody cannot run on hope. Too much money sits on the clock. Too many departments depend on the next decision. Cameras, costumes, lighting, makeup, music rights, schedules, locations, and actor availability all move around one basic need. Someone must be there to steer the work. When that person is not there, the damage spreads quietly at first. According to reports, the trouble around Bryan Singer involved repeated absences, tension on set, and production disruption. That is the language the public later received. It sounds clean because reporting has to sound clean. But on a set, those words can mean a day broken into nervous fragments. People wait, calls are made, assistants look for answers, actors stay ready without knowing when the next scene will move, crew members protect their own jobs by acting calm while the schedule begins to bleed money. The empty director's chair was not just a symbol, it was a financial problem. A studio film does not only lose time when work stops, it loses confidence. Every pause raises the same question: who is really in control here? For Rami Malek, that question was not abstract. He was not playing a small part that could be hidden if the production became messy. He was carrying Freddie Mercury. His work depended on focus, rhythm, and trust. A performance like that requires discipline from the actor, but it also requires a set stable enough for the actor to stay inside the character. When production becomes unstable, the actor still has to deliver the illusion of certainty on screen. That is the cruel part. The audience would never judge the final performance by saying, maybe the set was difficult. The audience would only ask whether Malek made them believe. They would watch his eyes, his mouth, his walk, his command of the stage. They would decide if Freddie felt alive enough inside the frame. Whatever trouble happened behind the camera, the burden of belief still landed on the person in front of it. Reports also described clashes around the production. That made the crack deeper. Absence can sometimes be treated as a scheduling issue. Conflict changes the atmosphere. It turns uncertainty into sides. People start watching tone, silence, who speaks, who avoids speaking, and who has the power to make tomorrow worse. A film set can still look professional, while everyone inside it understands that something is wrong. By December 2017, 20th Century Fox made the decision that turned private trouble into public fact. Bryan Singer was fired from Bohemian Rhapsody before the film was finished. A studio does not take that step lightly, not on a project this visible, not with Queen's name attached, not with a release still waiting and awards hopes still possible. Removing a director near the end of production is not a normal adjustment. It is a signal that the cost of keeping the situation had become greater than the cost of cutting it loose. That decision did not solve the problem. It only changed its shape. The movie still had to be finished. Scenes still had to be completed. The emotional center still had to survive. The studio did not need a public collapse. It needed a rescue operation on a film already deep into production. Dexter Fletcher was brought in to complete the remaining work. His role was specific and difficult. He was not walking into an empty canvas. He was stepping into a project already marked by pressure, expectation, and damage. The job was not to make himself the story. The job was to keep the film moving until it could stand in front of the public as a finished product. That is where Hollywood's survival instinct became visible. The machine did not stop. It adjusted. It removed the unstable part from the set, protected the release, and pushed the film toward completion. The product was too valuable to abandon. Freddie Mercury's name was too powerful. Queen's music was too marketable. Malek's performance was too important to waste. But the firing created a wound the campaign could not fully hide. The director had been removed, yet the film still needed to be sold as a triumph. That meant the public story had to become cleaner than the production story. It had to turn disruption into perseverance, instability into completion, and a troubled set into an awards season product. The crack had opened. The movie survived it. But survival came with a new problem. Someone would eventually ask the person standing closest to the fire what the experience had really felt like. The sentence that changed the campaign did not arrive as a speech. It arrived as a controlled answer. By the time Rami Malek faced questions about Bryan Singer, Bohemian Rhapsody had already been pushed into a safer public shape. The director had been fired. Dexter Fletcher had completed the film. The release had moved forward. The music was working. Audiences were responding. Malek's performance had become the clean center of the campaign. but a finished movie does not erase the working conditions that produced it. A reporter could still ask the obvious question, what was it like to work with Bryan Singer? That question mattered because Malek was not a distant observer. He had stood inside the production while it was under pressure. He had carried the role that gave the film its emotional value. He had the most to gain from the movie's success, and one of the clearest reasons to avoid dragging the production back into public damage. If he said too much, the scandal could become louder than the performance. If he said too little, he could look as if he were protecting the wrong person. So Malek chose a narrow line. He described his situation with Singer as not pleasant, not at all. The power of that sentence came from its restraint. It did not sound like a full accusation. It did not turn the interview into a courtroom. It did not pretend to tell every private detail. But it also refused to soften the experience into polite gratitude. Malek did not say everything was fine. He did not hand the campaign a clean memory. He gave the public a short answer that confirmed tension without making himself the source of another explosion. That is why the sentence worked so well and cut so sharply. Not pleasant sounds almost mild until it is placed beside the scale of the film. This was not a small job with a difficult week. This was a major studio project, a Queen biopic, a Freddie Mercury performance, and an awards campaign trying to keep emotion in front of controversy. In that setting, a calm phrase can land harder than anger. It tells the room that the clean version is incomplete. Malek had to protect two things at once. He had to protect his own reputation, and he had to protect the work. He could not let himself be folded into Singer's shadow. But he also could not destroy the film that had become the defining risk of his career. That balance is what made his answer so careful. He separated himself from the director without separating himself from Bohemian Rhapsody. From that moment, the campaign's job became more delicate. It had to place Malek in front of the story and keep Singer at the edge of it. Malek could speak about preparation, pressure, movement, voice, and the responsibility of playing Freddie. Queen's music could keep giving the film warmth. The Live Aid recreation could keep giving audiences a clean emotional climax. The director's name could remain present, but not central. That was not erasure. It was controlled distance. The campaign did not need audiences to forget Bryan Singer completely. It only needed them to care more about Rami Malek, Freddie Mercury, and Queen than about the directing credit. It needed a public path where viewers could still buy tickets, voters could still consider the performance, and the film could still be treated as a tribute rather than a production crisis. Malek's sentence helped create that path. It gave the public a way to understand him as separate from the trouble. He had worked through it. He had not pretended it was easy. He had not turned the whole film into a grievance. He looked professional, controlled, and honest enough to be trusted. But that trust came with a price. Once Malek said the experience was not pleasant, the campaign could no longer sell the movie as a clean triumph from start to finish. It could sell the finished product. It could sell the performance. It could let Queen carry the emotion. But the working conditions had entered the public memory. That is how a reputation war shifts. The question stops being only what happened behind the scenes. It becomes who gets to define what the public should remember. Was Bohemian Rhapsody the story of a great performance rising above chaos? Was it the story of a studio protecting a valuable product? Was it the story of a director removed from the set but still attached to the film? Or was it all of those things at once? Malek gave the campaign a line it could survive, but he also gave the audience permission to doubt the polished version. And once doubt entered the room, the next problem was waiting outside the set. The production trouble had been damaging enough. But as award season moved forward, Bryan Singer's name would bring a larger controversy into the frame, one the campaign could not control with music, nostalgia, or one careful sentence. The next problem did not come from the set. It came from the outside world at the worst possible time. Bohemian Rhapsody was moving through award season with the shape of a winner. The film had already survived the firing of its director. It had already found a cleaner public center in Rami Malek. It had already given audiences the comfort of Queen's music, Freddie Mercury's image, and a final act built to make people leave the theater feeling lifted. The campaign had a path. It was narrow, but it was working. Then The Atlantic published an investigative report in 2019 detailing serious allegations against Singer. Singer denied the allegations and criticized the report. That denial mattered, and the language around this part must stay careful. Allegations are not the same as a verdict. A report is not the same as a courtroom ruling. But awards, campaigns do not live only inside courtrooms. They live inside perception, timing, headlines, and public comfort. The timing was brutal. This was not a forgotten film being discussed years later. Bohemian Rhapsody was still in the middle of its victory march. Malek was being pushed as a major Best Actor contender. The film was being sold as an emotional tribute to Freddie Mercury. The public was being asked to separate the actor from the director, the songs from the scandal, and the finished product from the trouble that had followed it. The Atlantic report made that separation harder. The campaign could not simply pretend Singer had never been part of the movie. His name was still attached. His directing credit remained. The studio could keep him away from the emotional center, but it could not make the credit vanish from the finished film. That was the problem with a scandal that stays in the paperwork. It does not need to stand on a red carpet to remain present. For the film's public story, the report created a new layer of risk. The question was no longer only whether the production had been chaotic or whether Malek had found the work difficult. The question became whether Hollywood was willing to reward a film while the credited director's name was surrounded by allegations he denied. That question was not easy to control because it did not have one audience. It had critics, voters, fans, activists, journalists, Queen listeners, and people who had already made the film part of their emotional memory. Then Wilde made a public move that the campaign could not ignore. Bohemian Rhapsody had been in consideration for an award from the organization. After the report and Singer's response, Wilde removed the film from its nominees. That decision was not only symbolic, it showed that at least one institution was not willing to treat the controversy as a side issue while honoring a film about a queer icon. That is where the split became visible. Some parts of the industry stepped back. The Oscar race did not. This is the part of the story that makes the case so uncomfortable. Hollywood was not acting with one conscience. Different machines made different decisions. Wilde responded from a public accountability and community-facing position. The awards campaign responded from a product protection position. The film still had box office strength, it still had Malek's performance, it still had Queen's music, it still had Freddie Mercury's name. Those pieces were too valuable for the campaign to surrender, so the strategy became sharper. The campaign had to divide the danger. Singer's controversy had to stay in one corner. Malek's transformation had to stay in another. Freddie's legacy had to remain warm, emotional, and protected. The campaign had to keep the audience inside the songs. The film's success had to be treated as proof that audiences had already made their choice. That method gave people a way out. A voter did not have to feel as if they were rewarding Singer. They could say they were rewarding Malek. A viewer did not have to feel as if they were defending the production. They could say they came for Freddie. A fan did not have to answer every question about the credit. They could say the music mattered more. Each explanation made sense on its own. Together they became the campaign's survival method. But survival is not innocence. The controversy did not disappear because the song still worked. It only became easier to place somewhere else. The audience could keep singing. The awards race could keep moving. The film could keep collecting praise. But now every victory carried a second question beside it. What was being celebrated? And what was being carefully kept outside the emotional frame? That was the moment Bohemian Rhapsody stopped being only a troubled production story. It became a test of Hollywood's ability to separate risk from reward. Some institutions refused the separation. The awards machine kept going. And with each step forward, the film proved something colder than success. It proved that when the product is valuable enough, a scandal does not always stop the campaign. Sometimes it teaches the campaign exactly where to place the silence. The public did not enter Bohemian Rhapsody as one jury. It entered as several audiences at once. One audience came for Queen and did not want the film ruined by the name attached to the directing credit. They came for the songs, the concert scenes, the feeling of seeing Freddie Mercury brought back into a crowded room. For them, the movie was not a courtroom. It was a tribute. They could admit the production was troubled and still say the work on screen mattered. They could watch Rami Malek move across the stage and decide that his performance deserved to stand on its own. Another audience could not separate it that easily. To them, the director's credit was not a technical detail. It was a stain left inside the frame. The film could move the crowd, but it still carried a name surrounded by serious allegations he denied. The more the campaign pushed Freddie, Malek, and the music to the front, the more obvious the strategy became. The public was being asked to look at the safest parts of the product and leave the hardest part near the edge. That split made the film difficult to discuss honestly. If someone praised Malek, did that mean they were ignoring Singer? If someone criticized the film's campaign, did that mean they were dismissing Freddie's legacy? If someone loved the music, were they helping the studio move past the scandal too easily? The movie did not only divide critics, it divided the emotional position of the audience. Then came another argument, one that had nothing to do with whether the songs worked. Some critics argued that the film made Freddie Mercury's life safer and easier to package than it really was. They felt the story softened his sexuality, reshaped his private life, and turned difficult parts of his history into a more comfortable, mainstream arc. That criticism mattered because Freddie was not only a rock legend, he was also a queer icon whose life carried risk, secrecy, public myth, desire, illness, and pressure. A biopic always chooses. It compresses time, it simplifies conflict, it moves events into cleaner, dramatic order. But when the subject is Freddie Mercury, those choices carry more weight. The question becomes sharper. Was the film honoring the man, or was it making him easier to sell? For many viewers, the answer was simple. The film made them feel closer to Freddie. It made young audiences search Queen songs again. It put Live Aid back into public memory. It let people grieve and celebrate in the same sitting. That emotional value was real, and it should not be dismissed as foolish. But emotional value does not erase narrative control. A film can move people and still smooth the rough edges of a life. It can bring a figure to a new generation and still leave some viewers uneasy about what was softened to make that journey easier. Bohemian Rhapsody worked because it gave audiences a Freddie they could cheer for. The harder question was whether it gave them enough of the Freddie who was harder to package. That is where the Singer controversy made the public trial more bitter. The film was already being questioned for its safer version of Freddie. Then the name in the directing credit brought another layer of discomfort. A movie about a queer legend, criticized by some for softening queer truth, was also carrying the credit of a filmmaker facing allegations he denied. Even viewers who loved the movie had to feel the contradiction pressing against the applause. Bryan Singer did not need to appear in the campaign for that contradiction to remain. That was the point. His absence became part of the strategy. He was not the face on talk shows. He was not the emotional center of the posters. He was not the person voters were being asked to love. The campaign gave the public better images to hold. Malek under stage lights, Queen's music filling the room, Freddie's memory turned into a communal feeling. But absence is not erasure. At the end of the film, the credits still existed. The black screen still carried the name. A directing credit can be quiet, but it is not small. It tells the public who the industry officially recognizes as the authorial figure, even when the production story is more complicated. Singer could be pushed away from the celebration, but he could not be fully removed from the record. That is why every victory around the film carried a double image. One image was clean and useful, Rami Malek as Freddie holding the crowd in his hands. The other image was colder, the director's credit sitting behind the triumph like a problem nobody wanted to center. The audience could choose which image to look at first. It could not honestly pretend the second image was gone. So the public trial did not produce a clean verdict. It produced a split screen, love for Freddie, admiration for Malek, doubt over what the film softened, anger over what the campaign managed, unease over a credit that stayed attached after the set had moved on without him. Bohemian Rhapsody had become more than a hit. It had become proof that a film can be loved and questioned at the same time. The crowd could still sing, the performance could still move people, the box office could still rise, but behind the music was a quieter damage ledger, and every name on it had paid a different price. The damage ledger did not begin with failure. That is what made it harder to read. Bohemian Rhapsody did not disappear. It did not collapse at the box office. It did not lose the audience. It did not become a warning story about a doomed production that never recovered. The film survived, earned massive global money, and moved through awards season with enough force to make Rami Malek the face of its victory. That success is the first problem. Damage is easier to understand when the product fails. Here, the product won. For Malek, the cost was attached to the shape of the victory. He became the safest person to celebrate, but he also had to carry the film past questions he did not create. His performance became the clean road through a troubled story. Voters could reward the actor. Fans could praise the transformation. Interviews could focus on the work, the preparation, the responsibility of playing Freddie, and the emotional weight of the music. That protected him, but it also made him part of the campaign solution. He did not make the production crisis. He did not control the directing credit. He did not own the wider controversy around Bryan Singer, but his face helped the film move through it. That is a strange burden for an actor. The better the performance worked, the easier it became for the campaign to keep Freddie in front instead of the unresolved discomfort around the film. Malek won, but he won inside a frame that never fully cleared. His Oscar could be celebrated as a personal achievement, and many people did celebrate it that way. But the victory was not floating above the production history. It sat beside it. Every clean image of Malek holding the statue carried a quieter question. How much of this triumph depended on moving the right parts of the story out of view? For Bryan Singer, the damage took a different shape. He did not vanish from the film. His name remained in the credit. That alone made the case uncomfortable. A director normally becomes the public owner of a film's success. The industry praises vision, command, authorship, and control. But here, the film's success had to be narrated around the credited director, not through him. That was a rare kind of punishment. Singer remained attached to the achievement, but he was not useful to the celebration. His name was present as a problem, not as the face of victory. The campaign had no reason to make him central. The safer story was Malek, Freddie, Queen, the music, and the emotional experience. Singer's credits stayed on the record, but the spotlight moved away from him. The studio's damage was quieter because the studio still got what it needed. The film was finished. The release survived. The audience came. The campaign worked. The awards arrived. From a business view, the rescue was successful. But the studio lost the clean version of the story. It could not honestly sell Bohemian Rhapsody as a simple triumph of music and performance without the production trouble sitting nearby. That is the cost for a studio when a troubled product wins. It gets the money but not the innocence. It gets the awards but not the clean myth. It gets the applause but also the case study. Bohemian Rhapsody became proof that a studio can rescue a film from chaos, but it also became proof that rescue can mean careful separation rather than full accountability. Freddie Mercury's legacy paid a more complicated price. For many viewers, the film brought him closer. It sent people back to Queen songs. It put his stage power in front of a new generation. It made younger audiences ask about Live Aid, the band, the voice, the life behind the songs. That value was real. But some critics argued that the film made Freddie Mercury's life safer and easier to package than it really was. They felt the movie softened difficult parts of his sexuality, illness, private life, and timeline to create a more comfortable mainstream arc. That does not mean the film had no emotional truth. It means the truth was shaped for mass consumption. A rougher life became easier to sell. A sharper legacy became smoother on screen. The audience lost something too. They did not lose the songs. They did not lose Malek's performance. They did not lose the thrill of the concert scenes. What they lost was the clean way of watching. After this, Bohemian Rhapsody could not be only a tribute. It became a split object, moving and compromised, loved and questioned, profitable and uneasy. A viewer could still sing along. A viewer could still admire the performance. But the film now carried the knowledge of how carefully Hollywood can divide a story when too much money, memory, and prestige are at stake. That is the damage ledger. Malek carried the clean face of victory. Singer kept the credit but lost the usable spotlight. The studio kept the product but lost the innocent narrative. Freddie's story reached millions, but in a safer shape than some believed he deserved. And the audience was left with the hardest trade, to feel the music while knowing how much silence had been arranged around it. Hollywood could remove Bryan Singer from the set. It could not fully remove him from the film. That was the cold mechanism Bohemian Rhapsody carried to the finish line. Bryan Singer was fired before the film was completed. Dexter Fletcher came in to finish the work. The campaign could move Singer away from the emotional center, but the directing credit did not move with public comfort. Under Directors Guild rules, Singer still kept the official directing credit. That detail sounds technical until the money appears. Bohemian Rhapsody crossed more than $900 million worldwide. Once a film reaches that scale, success does not only mean applause, it activates deals, bonuses, back-end participation, and private calculations the audience never sees. According to industry reporting, Singer stood to receive a back-end payday beyond $40 million. That figure should be treated as reported, not as a public final accounting. But even as a reported number, it exposes the contradiction. Publicly, his name became difficult to celebrate. Financially, the film's victory could still make his attachment extremely valuable. That is the real scandal inside the scandal. Hollywood could push him out of the public celebration, but the structure still remembered him. The speeches could avoid his name. The campaign could keep the audience inside the songs. The audience could focus on Malek, but the paperwork did not care about discomfort. Bohemian Rhapsody proved that scandal does not always stop a product. Sometimes the product becomes too valuable to stop. The controversy gets moved to the side. The star goes in front. The brand stays protected, and the money keeps moving underneath. So the question is not whether Hollywood punished the problem. The question is whether the punishment meant anything when the credit remained, the film won, and the reported payday still followed the success. Bohemian Rhapsody became a case study in separation. Celebrate the actor, protect the brand, shrink the director, let Queen carry the emotion. As We Are the Champions rises, the colder image is not the crowd. It is the reported back-end payday beyond $40 million, moving through a system that knew where to place silence beside applause. Hollywood did not bury the film because of scandal. It carried the scandal through award season and proved the harder truth. When the product is valuable enough, accountability becomes easier to manage than to resolve. If this question stays with you, like, subscribe, and tell us below who really paid the price here.